I'm Kyle Kuyat, a certified financial planner and co-founder of Defining Wealth. And over the last several months, we helped 130 DIY retirees develop a financial plan that they can feel more confident in. And after developing these plans, there were several common blind spots that we've identified that I want to share with you today so you can avoid saying, I wish I knew that sooner. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you click like. Let's get right on into it. Starting off with one of the most common themes that we saw with a lot of these retirees is that they were retirement account rich, meaning they had a lot of money in pre-tax retirement accounts and not nearly as much as they should have in Roth and taxable accounts. Now, for some people, this may not be a big deal, but for many of these folks, they were trying to retire or at least make work optional before 59 and a half. And although some of them could use the rule of 55, which allows them to take distributions out of their employer account at age 55 or after, they were still in a position where a lot of these retirees regretted not filling up those taxable account buckets earlier. And let's face it, a lot of these retirees had goals in retirement. And a lot of them wanted to do so many things as soon as they're retired, like big trips and large expenditures. Having to take money out of your pre-tax accounts or your retirement accounts in order to do that isn't necessarily the most optimal strategy. Not to mention having cash on hand to pay for Roth conversions and control your tax situation. It's super important to have tax diversification built into your retirement income plan. The next common mistake revolved around a question that a lot of these retirees had. It came up in probably every single conversation, and that is health insurance. The overwhelming majority of people just don't really know where to go and didn't have the conversation until they were staring retirement in the face or after they had already made the decision to retire. Now, this is going to be different again for everyone, whether you're going to go and look at an ACA plan, private insurance, potential COBRA, or even Medicare, depending on how old you are when you retire. However, we encourage a lot of these retirees that still had time, and I would encourage you to have a conversation with a health insurance professional at least 12 months before you retire. There's also some independent groups out there. We work with one called Move Health, which I will link down below, and they can help you evaluate all of the options out there, whether it's ACA, private insurance, even some health share options, or even help you make the Medicare decision whenever that time comes. Healthcare is likely one of the largest expenses that you'll be facing, and it's important to make sure that you have the numbers and math correct built into your plan before you make this decision. Now, number 3 might be a little bit controversial, but this is where a lot of people's eyes were opened during these conversations. Many of these retirees, especially those that were planning for an early retirement pre-65, were considering receiving subsidies for the ACA healthcare plans. But the overwhelming majority of these folks had more than enough money to not have to do that. And a lot of them were planning to lower their spending or take money out of the wrong accounts just in order to get the subsidies. And a lot of these folks, as I mentioned earlier, were missing the forest through the trees. While the subsidies can be helpful, and again, don't get me wrong, this is going to be dependent on your situation. If you have millions of dollars in pre-tax money and a long runway to do, for example, Roth conversions, keeping your modified adjusted gross income low just to receive a subsidy is oftentimes trading pennies for dollars. What I mean by that is they rather save a few dollars today than if you zoom out and look at their overall picture of their retirement. Making another decision, such as, for example, Roth conversions, could have a much larger dollar and cents impact on their overall retirement. Again, this is dependent on your situation, but for a lot of these folks, this was a common error. One of the next common mistakes was completely ignoring tax location once you're in retirement. If you're not familiar with tax location, it's holding certain types of assets in different types of accounts in order to optimize your plan. So for example, a lot of these retirees had a 60-40 portfolio, meaning 60% equities and 40% bonds and fixed income. Problem was they were 60-40 across the board. While that's not a terrible glaring issue, they are leaving some money on the table and it's not necessarily optimal. For example, one of the retirees we had talked to had a 60-40 portfolio in their Roth IRA. They weren't planning to draw from it because they were doing a bucket strategy. So in reality, rather than being 60-40 in every single account, the ideal scenario would be to have your equities in your Roth, your bonds, and your fixed income in your pre-tax IRAs, and then your cash in any individual stocks or even some other equities in your taxable accounts. Again, this is going to vary for everybody and shift as you get later into your retirement and do things like conversions, for example. However, another reality of what happened was we had a gentleman that was in a 60-40 portfolio. He was trying to do Roth conversions. However, the gains in his pre-tax account were outpacing the conversions he was able to do. Again, good problem to have, but not optimal. It can mostly be avoided, or at least planned for, depending on how you set up your accounts and what you have invested in each one of them. The next is a very, very common theme, and probably 90% of the conversations we had, most folks, the answer was no, or it's been a while. Can you guess what it is? It's not having your estate documents in order. Now, I get it. It's not a fun conversation, but it is a necessary one. And whether you've been an executor of someone's estate, whether it was a parent or a family member, if you've dealt with an estate that's not in order, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you have dealt with one that is in order, well, then you can see the benefits of having your estate documents created and updated properly. I do joke with folks that a lot of times the estate planning is one of those things that's just always on the list, but never gets done. And the reality is, for a lot of DIYers, there's typically one of you that wears the financial hat in the relationship. And a lot of times the reality is the non-financial spouse wants almost nothing to do with the financial side of things. And the last thing you want to leave them with is a financial mess on top of an emotional one. Now, although some of these folks worked with a financial advisor already, the ones that didn't did some form of DIY planning themselves. Now, although there were a lot of folks that had pretty good estimates, there were some on one side of the fence or the other, meaning that their estimates were either way too conservative or they were way too aggressive. And for the overly aggressive folks, that's a little bit more of a difficult conversation. You don't want to enter into retirement on a razor's edge. And being overly conservative, although that is much better in my opinion than being more aggressive, that means that you're going to have more likely than not a lot more money at the end of your retirement than when you started. There were some folks with estimates as low as 3, 2, and even almost 1.5%. Not to mention inflation that was well above or even double historical averages. And I'm all for being conservative, but in reality, this means two things. Either A, you could be spending more money and you won't realize that you can do it until it's too late. Or for some of these folks, they may actually run into a potential estate tax issue down the line, even if nothing changes with that. Again, it's important to test all different types of scenarios, and if you'd like to do that yourself, you can actually use the software that we use completely for free. The link is down below. Go ahead and check it out. One of the next common mistakes for some of the DIYers was having way too complicated of an investment strategy that was focused on high information, high turnover, and required high attention from them all throughout their retirement. Now, for some folks, that's great. But for most of these retirees, they made it very clear that this was not something they wanted to be doing as a part-time job in retirement. For many, simple beats complex, especially if you're going at it alone. Not just from an investment selection standpoint, but also from an account standpoint. We came across multiple people that had dozens and dozens of accounts at several different custodians. Talk about a nightmare to manage for the ongoing rest of your retirement. Again, this is going to depend on your situation and your appetite for this, but consolidating to at least one or a maximum of 2 custodians for most people is a pretty good idea to have a retirement that is manageable and easy to track. Last is another conversation that came up almost all the time, and that is long-term care. To no surprise, many of these folks did not have a plan for it, although many of them felt the reality of what long-term care can do from a financial standpoint. And whether it's my family or yours, many of us are aware of the effects that long-term care can have, especially when it comes to retirement income planning. In fact, for the majority of our clients, we always build in a long-term care component because it can have that much of an impact on your plan, especially if you don't plan for it. For a lot of the people we talked to, they were able to self-insure to a degree. However, a longer long-term care stay, say that 5 times fast, for either one of these spouses would have a much larger impact on their plan than they came to realize. And again, this is going to depend on everyone's situation, including your health and family history, as well as, of course, your finances. And while I'm not a huge fan of pure long-term care insurance, there are some hybrid options out there that aren't all use it or lose it. They can be more cost-effective and also have a little bit of a more lenient underwriting. Again, this is going to depend greatly on your situation. These are some of the common blind spots that we helped people identify when creating their financial plans. And the good news is you don't have to go at it alone either. If you'd like to have a conversation, we'd be happy to help. Or if you simply like to see more videos like these, make sure you go ahead and click subscribe. Again, I'm Kyle Kuyat, and I'll see you next time.